Hello watch enthusiasts. Now, as many of you will be aware, this week has hosted SIHH 2018, and this was originally founded by the Vacheron Group in terms of creating an opposing sort of show to Baselword for their own watches and for smaller independents. And we've seen various very interesting watches, and today I'm going to release two videos. The first of which is this one on dress watches, the second of which will come later on sports watches. And there will be a certain crossover between these models because there are always watches that bridge the gap, but I hope to produce two interesting videos about the most interesting releases of the show. Indeed, this model, which is this brand new IWC, which is a rather interesting piece because it takes inspiration from the Pulweber pocket watch in terms of creating a new model, and this won't feature in these videos because it was released prior to the show, but still is a beautiful, beautiful timepiece and a very interesting one to look at. And just so that everyone is informed, there won't be a video this coming Wednesday, but service will continue as ever on the following Sunday, because producing these two videos for the Sunday took up the time that would be used for producing Wednesday's episode. And so as a result, I hope you can understand that I'm taking the week to then return to normal schedule. Now, the first watch is a piece which is to remain on the theme of IWC. And IWC have been celebrating their 150th anniversary this year, and so they've released a very wide range of models, which are both pieces which we've already seen in different iterations, but also some new models, and the ones I'm including in this video are new models. And the first one is a piece which I like enormously. I like it in a very similar way to the way I like the JLC Master Control with its sector dial. But this model is very different, and in many ways this is probably a more practical timepiece to own. And this watch is 43.2mm, placing it at rather a large size, but due to the fact that this watch is designed to be inspired by pocket watch-derived watches in the early days of wristwatches. It features that typical style of Portugieser style of polished case, with those lugs which extend outwards. And this is by no means a small watch, but I think it functions very well as somewhere between a dress watch and a highly legible everyday sort of watch. Moving inwards from the almost non-existent polished bezel, which allows the real estate of the dial to be simply immense, we see this beautiful white dial, which is this pearly white sort of colour, as well as these very classically inspired, almost Art Deco, but simpler than that, sorts of hour markers in the form of numerals. There is then a railway style of second or minute track, depending on whether you're looking at the subsidiary seconds or the central dial, and then blending it in extremely well is a date window at 3 o'clock, which as has been suggested by a lot of people looking at this watch, is very, very well concealed, and I think is exactly how a date window should be added to a watch. Then the hands are these beautiful leaf styles of hands, and the simple pointer second hand, which are blued in a style which we've seen from IWC for many years, but which I feel suit this watch perfectly. And the watch is available in two variants, with one having the stainless steel polished case, which goes extremely well as far as creating a watch which is monochromatic and beautifully executed in terms of being a wonderful hybrid between the elegant dress watch which the design would suggest and a comfortable everyday style of watch, which is something that I'll also come on to with the movement, because that's a very crucial part of this watch, in a package which isn't ostentatious and which doesn't draw attention to itself. Then there is the gold version for $18,800 as opposed to $9,900, which is far brighter and more bold for those who do enjoy their precious metals, though I must admit my personal favourite is the steel. Internally we see the IWC in-house calibre 59215, and this is a movement which works immensely well with this watch and justifies the size, because it's almost exactly the same size as the case of the watch, which means that you get this brilliant view of it through a monumentally large exhibition caseback, rather than the usual small window in the middle of the caseback. And we see beautifully decorated striped bridges with these visible jewels, as well as blued elements on the power reserve hand, which is placed on the back of the watch rather than the front, to not take up space on the dial, but still allow you to see where you are with regards to winding this 8-day power reserve watch, so that's 196 hours by comparison to the 40 hours you usually get out of a movement in a watch. And then of course you can see the balance wheel down by the corner of the watch, and 150 years on that medallion, which only adds to the beauty of this movement and the elegance of the watch as a whole. Now, the choice of the second watch from IWC in this video was difficult, because there were various other Portugieser models with different calendars and indeed tourbillons. But I thought really the only watch that could be featured in this video, bearing in mind the fact that we have various other interesting complications to be seen in the rest of the video, was none other than the new IWC Portugieser Constant Force Tourbillon Edition 150 years. And this is a magnificent looking watch, with this wonderful blue dial, or indeed white dial, depending on which model you go for, of which each will be made in no more than 15 examples. And of course, within the immense platinum case, we see the beautiful exhibition opening, I suppose you could say, to be able to see that bridge holding the constant force tourbillon at 9 o'clock. And this provides a wonderful view into the movement of all of this functionality, and the technology which has gone into this, which was originally pioneered in 2011, but has only now been resurrected in the form of this timepiece. Then we have this triangular formation with the power reserve placed at 4:30, which shows the 96-hour power reserve of this watch, to give you those 4 days of time to use this timepiece, as well as the fact that it has, on the 1 o'clock position, a moon phase, which is built into the dial very, very nicely, and especially on the blue dial, blends away very nicely when you don't want to see it, but is a wonderful addition when you do. And these watches are united in movement with this beautifully decorated and really magnificently built 150th anniversary version of the caliber 94805, which is a 96-hour power reserve movement, which is a piece which is unique to this timepiece, with these two bridges that are clearly visible, which conceal most of the movement but allow you to have the text and the medallions on it. Though I think from a pure perspective of design it's not as attractive as the movement in its less expensive counterpart, but does allow you to see the positioning and the holding of that constant force tourbillon, which is of course far more visible from the front of the watch. And due to the technology that's gone into this watch, and indeed the fact that it's limited to 15 pieces of each colour, the price is eye-watering at $253,000, which of course raises it to the very top of the IWC line. But I think in terms of technology and innovation, especially in terms of being able to create a constant force tourbillon, which is a notoriously difficult complication to pull off, they certainly have created a beautiful watch, irrespective of the price. The night before SIHH began, Piaget released this, the Altiplano Ultimate Concept. And this is a piece which surprised us all, I think, because only a few weeks prior they released the 910P, which is the slimmest automatic watch in the world, which is only 4.33mm thick, which is frankly baffling as the movement is built into the caseback and the rotor runs around the edge of the movement. However, this watch I think redefines slim horology, because this 13-jewel concept watch, which isn't designed to be made by the way, it's purely a technical demonstration, is only 2mm thick. And just to put that into context, that's significantly slimmer than most watch straps, and indeed much slimmer than the vast majority of watch movements. In fact, an ETA 2824 alone, without any case, is over twice the thickness of this watch. And it's impressive to be able to say that Piaget have innovated every part of this watch, down to the ultra-thin 1.1mm thick leather strap, which is Kevlar backed in order to remain together, because any thicker and it wouldn't fit between the lugs and the case. We then also have the movement itself, which is built out of the caseback, which is, by the way, a single piece, so as a result there is no caseback as such, but rather simply a base plate and caseback as one. We then have the movement which is built upwards with no casing around the spring, for example, because that would add thickness. Then the balance wheel is supported on ball bearings rather than being freely held as it usually is the case, and it has the proprietary worm style of keyless works used by Piaget. Then the dial, due to its additional thickness, due to the fact that dials have to have hands which demand a certain amount of space, is sunken into the movement, you could say, and shows a remarkable care with regards to the sizing of this watch in order to fit all the parts. Then there's one aspect of this watch which I find remarkable, which is the crown, which is this flattened section of the case, as you can see, which requires a special tool to turn, but would still be usable without that tool, but nonetheless will be difficult to manipulate due to its shape. Then there's the fact the crystal is 0.2mm thick. Now, to put that into context, the crystal of my Omega Seamaster, for example, albeit a watch which is designed to take about 10 times the water pressure this watch is designed to take, is 15 times the thickness of the crystal of this watch, which is unbelievable and difficult to get your mind around, but it is remarkable that Piaget are able to produce a watch with such intricacy and care to achieve a single goal. And I must say, over the past few years, my respect for Piaget has enormously grown. Bearing in mind they released the 900P, which when released was the slimmest manually wound watch ever made. Then we saw the thinnest automatic watch ever made, released earlier this year. But then we do also have this tremendous piece, which is something which I think won't be beaten in a hurry in terms of being thinner, because at this stage you get a watch which isn't practical to wear, which I think means that we've really reached the limits of ultra-slim watches. And the next watch in this video is another ultra-slim timepiece, but in a very different way. And this is a new version of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, and this particular model is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak RD number 2, which is a concept and is a perpetual calendar. And I would normally include Royal Oaks in the sports or casual section of these reviews of these large shows, but I feel that doesn't really do it justice due to the fact that it's a watch which is designed to be a dress watch at its core, whereas the standard models are designed to be watches which bridge that gap between sports watches and dress watches, with a sporty appeal but fundamentally dress-orientated design and indeed aesthetic. And this is the world's slimmest perpetual calendar with dimensions of 41mm, so the standard size of this watch, but indeed of 6.3mm thick. And for a perpetual calendar that is, of course, unheard of. The amount of complication required to do that is baffling, bearing in mind the fact that when one looks at that Piaget, it's simply dealing with the hours and the minutes. This watch is dealing with the hours, the minutes, as well as the date, the leap year, and it has to take that into account in order to never have to set the date, which is a feat which is always impressive in a watch, but in this case all the more impressive because it's fitted into this 6.3mm thick case size. And this does mean the display can't be as elegant as something like a Patek Philippe model, where one has windows for these various functions, but as far as a technical innovation, this is remarkable. And it's cased in a platinum case, a fully platinum case, with all the design cues you would expect to see from this watch, with the brushed octagonal bezel, those visible octagonal screws, as well as that design which is echoed in Genta's work, of course, the designer of this timepiece in 1972. But then one has the aspect of this watch which is the fact that, despite the fact this is the most complicated Royal Oak there is, it's also the slimmest Royal Oak that's ever been made. It's even slimmer, in fact, than the ladies' model, the small ladies' model in quartz, which is again a feat which Audemars have been able to achieve with the same tapisserie dial in blue, with those sunburst effect subdials for the day of the week, the date, the month, the leap year, and as well as that the general time. And as if this watch didn't already have enough complication, they've also added a moon phase at 12 o'clock to just add to the elegance of the watch and the credentials as far as a dress watch goes. And the design is of course typical of the Royal Oak, but I love the way Audemars have been able to convert that to a timepiece of very, very high horology merit with relative ease. Though of course there is the aspect this watch is a concept, so unfortunately it won't be going up for sale anytime soon, and in fact I wouldn't expect it ever to come up for sale unless they're able to make this reliable, because of course maintaining and having the upkeep for a movement of this type will of course be a headache if someone were to own this watch. But regardless, this is more of a technical demonstration by Audemars Piguet to keep themselves relevant in a world of ever-evolving horology. Now, before SIHH this year, I think we all thought that FP Journe were going to be the brand to produce the most interesting watch in the chronograph segment. But really, Lange Sohne has stolen their thunder quite completely with this, the triple-split chronograph. And the triple-split chronograph finds its origins in the world of the rattrapante style of chronograph. And this style of chronograph has two second hands which run over each other simultaneously, and so you can stop one whilst the other one continues to time in order to register a time in between. If you were, say, timing the laps of a car around a racetrack, you could stop the second hand, the second one, in order to measure the lap time, but then continue with the other chronograph hand in order to continue measuring the lap. Then you can simply press a button, they all realign, and you continue timing as usual. However, a few years ago, Lange Sohne produced a platinum watch called the double split, where you could split not only the seconds but also the minutes. And here they've beaten their own watch by producing this, the triple split. And the triple split is a watch which allows you to separate the seconds, the minutes, and the hours, which is completely unprecedented and unheard of, which only adds to the nature of this watch as a revolutionary timepiece to get hold of. And I must say, as far as all the watches there are for around $150,000, which this watch comes in $147,000, this is without a doubt the best value, and I have no doubt will appreciate in value. And the form factor of this watch is truly at odds with those ultra-slim watches, being rather a hefty watch at 43.2mm by 15.6mm thick. But the impressive thing is that 15.6mm is incidentally the same size and thickness as the double split. So they've been able to incorporate all this additional function into a case which is no larger. And it's presented on the dial in a very legible way with those two offset subdials. And I must admit, I could have spoken about their new 1815 chronograph, which is a far more modest chronograph from the brand. But the way they've executed this watch just wipes the floor with that, and it's understandable, bearing in mind this watch costs 3 times as much. But this was the watch to talk about as far as interesting ones to hear about. And as I've said, you have these offset, sunburst effect, lighter grey subdials, with the hours at 12 o'clock on the same style of anthracite as the rest of the dial, and the power reserve indicator at 6, because this is a manually wound watch. And it has beautiful finishing with the traditional style of silver dial, which is then coloured, has a tachymeter around its edge with the branding at the top, as well as blued elements to be able to differentiate those hands very quickly and easily. This 46 jewel movement is exquisitely finished, with the most spectacular of detailing from those various levels of the chronograph, those double column wheels for the chronographs acting independently. And then, of course, we have blued screws everywhere, 46 jewels, an almost entirely concealed balance wheel just in order to get it out of the way. And then the typical unique engraving on the balance cock, which is just something wonderful to see. And the detailing on this movement is beyond anything that, like myself, the average ETA watch wearer will ever get to experience. But when one does get to see these incredible creations, if only briefly, they are wonderful to experience. And there were various other watches from Lange Sohne that I could have included, including various remakes of watches they currently make in smaller sizes, as well as redesigns of current versions with dates and so on. But I thought, in order to provide a real scope of the spectrum of this brand, I'd like to talk about a new model of the Saxonia. And the Saxonia is the least expensive timepiece they make as a range, and is the most simple, with simply the minutes and the hours, which is something which I think brings watches very much back to their core essence and most basic style. However, this is a whole new style of this watch, because it's a 39mm white gold version, which is a significantly more expensive piece than the $14,500 starting point of this watch in dollars at 37mm. And the watch doesn't feature any more complication, it still features the same minutes and hours, but it's in the build of this watch that we see changes. Again, it retains the caliber L093.1, which is a 72-hour power reserve manually wound movement by Lange Sohne in-house. But the dial of this watch is the most interesting section, which is this beautiful silver dial, which is then finished with a layer of goldstone, which is a type of glassy finish to the surface of the dial, onto which these faceted indices are then applied. But then there is the element of copper oxide crystal, which are embedded in the surface of this to create this style which resembles the night sky extremely well. And we see a gradient from the bottom of the dial to the top of the dial as a lightening of the tone rises through the dial, which is similar to some of the diving watches that we've seen recently over the past year especially, with a lot of dials going from black to blue, bottom to top of the dial. Whereas here we have a far more subtle gradient, showing the night sky in all its glory, with a matching strap, which makes this watch an absolutely sublime timepiece, and one which I think I would definitely consider over a Rolex, for example, for this sort of price range. Now, as a unitary watch, as a whole piece, I feel this Laurent Ferrier Galet annual calendar Montre École is one of the most beautiful made. And this watch is a 40mm by 10.1mm thick timepiece, which features an annual calendar. And it's a complete in-house watch with a beautifully polished case with those fantastic screwed lugs, which resemble something from Breguet, but with all the complication and detail of something like a pocket watch, which allows it to appear incredibly simple, but whilst actually having a very complex form. The crown also follows that pumpkin style by being flatter than an onion crown, and thus not protruding as much. But then one has the attractive aspect of still having those ridges along it and giving it a very old-fashioned look. Then we also have a button on the left-hand side of the case, which again allows one to set the calendar. The dial is a thing of real beauty, with brushing in a circular motion for the second and minute track, as well as having a straight up and down brushing for that central section. Then, in a very 1940s style, one has the blue and red used for the date, which runs around the edge of the dial as a pointer date, with a red hand. Then there's the day of the week and the month at 12 o'clock on either side of this crosshair style of dial, which allows simplicity but without compromising legibility, with highly legible hands and a high contrast on the dial. There's also the small seconds at 6 o'clock, which allow one to further break down the dial, and make this watch a piece which is vintage without trying to be vintage, which is something I appreciate enormously in a world of a lot of watches with aged luminescence and case designs which appear dated, whereas this appears just as contemporary as a modern watch would, but whilst remaining a piece which catches the interest and the eye of a collector, for example, of someone who enjoys 1940s timepieces. Two versions of this watch are available. There's the light, warm silver, which is my personal favourite, which I must say I don't think I'd ever tire of if I owned one of these, as I am very quickly falling for this watch as far as a beautiful piece of engineering goes. Or there is a slate grey style of dial, which has a much more dark and potentially less old-fashioned look to it if you want something more contemporary. But nonetheless, they both share that elegance and beauty that these watches inherently have with their case design. And internally these feature the LF126.01, which is a 23 jewel movement with an annual calendar, as you can see, with an 80-hour power reserve, which is completely in-house and does add to the value of this watch, though no official price has yet been released. Now, I wouldn't normally put the words relatively affordable and Vacheron Constantin in the same sentence, but I feel this is the time to do so, because Vacheron Constantin have released a new range of 3 new models in the Fiftysix range, and the Fiftysix range has been released as the sort of budget Vacheron Constantin section, and that's by no means a criticism of their quality, which remains impeccable and of course of the high horology nature that they are, but whilst offering something to a buyer who wants a watch which isn't the typical incredibly expensive high horology piece, but something with the same quality and of course brand name for a more affordable price. And it's based on the 1956 reference 6073, but with a modern build, but while still retaining that flair of the 1950s. At the bottom of the range we have the date version, which features these wonderful angles to it and these pseudo crown guards on this fully polished dress watch. It's 40mm by 9.6mm and is water resistant to 30m, with a degree of luminescence on the hands and the indices, which adds to the daily use of this watch as a practical piece. But then the watch itself features these interesting curves and angles, which offer an even further style of affordable watch than what was previously available from Vacheron Constantin, in a far more conservative package for those who like something more simple. And it has beautifully applied indices and all the care you would expect to be applied to this watch, with brushing and sunbursting on the dial, as well as matting to create something unique on the market. And it's available in 2 versions, either the steel version for $11,700 or the pink gold version for $19,400, which does make it very much an affordable model in their range. And of course, by standard measures, that's by no means affordable, but for this brand it is remarkable. And the movement is quite an interesting piece. It's the Vacheron Constantin caliber 1326, built for this watch, but is based on a Cartier movement, and of course is procured by the Richemont group themselves for this timepiece. It is worth noting, though, that whilst this movement isn't designed by Vacheron Constantin in its entirety, and in fact is more designed by Richemont rather than Vacheron Constantin themselves, they do still build the movements, which does add a certain credit to it, and of course they finish the movements in their particular way, which makes the movement their own rather than simply an off-the-shelf piece, and is of course an extraordinarily high-range movement with a 48-hour power reserve and a high beat rate. The next rung up this range is the day-date, and I must admit this is my least favourite of these versions because I feel the dial is too cluttered, and the asymmetry of it simply doesn't work for me. But for those who do like the same design as the date version, this offers 2 subdials which are beautifully finished, and though I don't like the aesthetic of this watch, I think its a build and conception in terms of design is impeccable. And they've done an extremely good job of decorating those subdials very, very nicely, and providing it with the same legibility, though I must say the offset power reserve at 6 o'clock would bug me if I owned this watch. And this version features a fully in-house movement as opposed to the other version, with the caliber 2475 SC/2. And it's a 40-hour power reserve movement with the same high beat rate. But of course it does now feature that day-date indicator, which does add practicality to the watch over the standard version, whilst the power reserve indicator, offset though it may be, does again help one if one doesn't wear the watch very often, to be able to know just how much power reserve it has and how accurate it will be. Because of course those who do like accurate watches will want it to be somewhere in the middle, because that is generally regarded as the most accurate part of a winding cycle. And crowning the top of this affordable range, so to speak, is for $21,600 for the steel, or $35,800 for the pink gold, the complete calendar version of this, which features the same case but now with a calendar which is like a sort of a triple calendar, if you will. So it has the date, the day of the week, the month, and the moon phase. And this is slightly different to what you would normally expect, because it doesn't feature an annual calendar or a perpetual calendar, but rather one which you have to change in February. And indeed, if there is the change of a leap year, you also have to account for that. But nonetheless, it still offers you a great deal of complication. And the movement is the 2460 QCL, which gives you 40 hours of power reserve and a very, very detailed finishing on the movement, as well as a dial which is very varied in its finishing and detailing on the various segments of it, which I think helps this watch be a far more elegant timepiece as a whole. And internally it has the 2460 QCL, which is a movement which is of course in-house, but is also tested to a degree which is really superlative in the world of high horology, because of its in-house nature from Vacheron Constantin. The final collection of watches I'd like to talk about is the range from Vacheron Constantin called the Métiers les Aérostiers. And this is a range of dress watches designed to commemorate aviation and indeed ballooning in its early late 18th century days. And this set of five watches, that's to say there are 5 to be produced of each style, will sell for $135,000 which is an immense sum of money, but the craftsmanship which goes into these watches is unparalleled in terms of the detailing of the engraving on these dials. And they all feature the same 40mm by 12.74mm case, and the same caliber 2460 in-house movement from Vacheron Constantin, which shows beautiful, beautiful finishing and a really gorgeous level of detailing. And these show the day, the date, as well as the hour and the minutes through four rotating wheels, which are seen through 4 windows in the dial, which I'll explain a little bit later as I talk about each watch individually. The first model is the Versailles 1783, and this features a brown style of finishing and general aesthetic from the strap to the tinting of that enamel on the dial, which is applied in a pliqué à jour style of application, with a wonderful two-tone gold style of medallion placed in the centre of the dial, which is manufactured by an individual, and each is hand-engraved and hand-built. And this model is designed to commemorate the Montgolfier brothers' flight over Versailles in 1783 with a crew of animals on board due to safety reasons and fears, which went extremely well. And the fact with this it's rather interesting because of course that was Versailles was of course the home of the French monarchy until the 6th of October 1789 when they were driven out into central Paris. And so there is a genuine historical aspect to this model, which gives the most subdued, I feel, of designs in this collection. The most vibrant of these watches comes next, and this is the Paris 1783, which is the depiction of the Montgolfier brothers' manned flight over Paris that very year, with the same sort of detail taken on the balloon, which is an exquisite piece of craftsmanship in the 2 tones of gold, which allows incredible detail and precision where they've created this, with that ring around the dial, with blue as the primary colour for this watch, and a bright blue of the sky, which I think looks absolutely wonderful. The third model, which uses green as its predominant colour, is an attempt by Blanchard in Paris 1784 to produce a sort of an early version of the dirigible, or indeed the blimp. And this was a vehicle designed to be capable of steering and moving around the sky in a controlled manner, unlike balloons normally do, which wasn't terribly functional in practice, but one has this wonderful depiction of these wings being operated from the basket beneath the balloon, which makes for a fantastic viewer experience of this watch, and only adds to the intricacy of the engraving. The fourth example is this red-toned version, which commemorates a flight over Bordeaux in 1784. And this flight is shown by that wonderful red colour, which is toned in a gradient style across that dial, with the largest of the balloons in terms of real estate for engraving, with mythical scenes on it, as well as the largest gondola, which provides the greatest space for intricate, delicate, and very impressive handiwork in terms of designing it and creating such a beautiful piece. The final piece in the series is the Bagnole 1785, and this model is based on a flight which was seen by over 10,000 spectators of this particular balloon with this blue dome, which has been wonderfully recreated here in gold. And this features a darker blue than the first blue model, but does offer something slightly different to a buyer. And I love the variety with these versions in terms of being able to really choose just what style you're after from these different designs, which all hold a certain beauty and elegance, both in their dial design and indeed in their cases, with these wonderful curves and indeed these screwed lugs, which are again typically classic, and that wonderful crown, which is delicate but also very easily used due to its protruding shape and size. And I'll finish with this watch because I think this is a really rather nice way to end, with that beauty of these dials, with a real look in something different in the world of watchmaking. And do leave your comments down below as to which was your favourite, and indeed if there were any dress models, notably for example certain models from Cartier which I excluded, just because I thought there were other models which were perhaps more interesting in a half-an-hour video. But do leave your comments down below regardless, as I really am interested to hear what you think. So thank you very much for watching, and if you did enjoy the video then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to be able to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm on the Watch Guy, over and out.